All right, Rich Moore, Byron Howard, and Clark Spencer. We got the two directors and one of the producers of Zootopia. This is a movie that deals with some pretty heavy themes for an animated film about talking animals. Uh, so,
They wear clothes too.
yeah, um,
Crazy.
yeah. So, first, I want to ask where the idea for this movie came from.
Well, early on, about 5 years ago, we talked to John Lasseter, our boss, about the fact that we hadn't done a talking animal movie at Disney for a long time, like a movie with just animals.
Mhm.
And he was really into that. He thought it was such a great idea. And but we figured out that if we're going to do this, it had to be different than any other animal movie that's ever been seen before. And the way we were going to do that was really figure out how these animals created this society and figure out how, if there are predators and prey living next to each other peacefully in a society, how does that all work? What advantages are there to that arrangement, and what disadvantages and challenges are there? And that very quickly led us to this idea of telling a movie with this idea of bias and the issues of bias at its core. And it's a very complex idea. And in the beginning, people were like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this kind of movie?" And we're like,
with animals.
with the animals. And we said no, and it's going to be funny too. There are going to be funny moments in it, and it's going to be this, and it's going to be a detective story. And people thought, well, are we
Okay.
okay? See if you can do it. But the thing is that once we really dove in, we started to learn much more about the subject that we were talking about, which is bias. And we learned a lot more about ourselves over the last couple of years. And one of the things that we love about the movie is that it doesn't try to kind of button everything up with a pretty bow at the end and say this is an easily solved issue. This is an issue that's always been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. And even our main character, Judy, who has this great desire to do good and be a great cop, finds that she herself has to look inwardly and figure out that she has a ways to go herself. And that's a very mature, complex decision for an animated character, an animated rabbit, to make. But I think that's why people really root for her. That's why they relate to her.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So talk about the two of you coming together. Clark, you've produced movies for both of them. Were you instrumental in getting them to work together, or did you force your hand a little bit?
To your corners.
You're right. I came off of Wreck-It Ralph, where I'd worked with Rich, and I'd worked with Byron on Bolt prior to that. And Byron was already developing Zootopia, and there was a point where there was a big shift in the story where we moved it away from being Nick's story to being Judy's story. And when you do that late in the game, you have a lot of work you have to do. And so we said, well, Rich seems like the perfect partner to come in and start building this version of the film, which ultimately was the best decision we could have ever made, because Rich brings his history with The Simpsons and his humor and his emotional storytelling, and Byron brings his legacy with Disney and his storytelling. It's kind of the perfect combination for this film, and so it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, so it's really the perfect team. It's again a complex movie, complex message, and it took a lot of us working together and bringing our own perspectives into the movie, because a lot of the stuff you'll see represented on the screen comes from us and our crew talking in rooms together for months and years about our personal experience, like the bullying experiences and issues we've talked about with our crew, and even like our research into police officers who've come up through the ranks and who've experienced bias and just different aspects
and
of that.
I think that it kind of speaks to our process of that if you want to tell an honest story, I think the best way to start is to be honest with one another, and I don't think that stories like this just kind of come out of a vacuum. It took a really great group of story artists, and two great writers, to be very honest with one another and say, like, we really want to talk about the issues of discrimination and bias and what that's really like in this world, and not try and solve it in a 90-minute long story. So how do we go about doing that? And it was sharing lots of different experiences and what we kind of learned from those experiences, and some were still very alive in some people, and we're able to take that honesty, you know, and put it into a movie like this. And I think that's how you get results where the characters feel genuine. If they feel like people that I've known in my life, and they're struggling with things that feel real to me and to the audience. But it really has to, and that's why we call our group of directors and heads of story the story trust, you know, because there is a deep level of trust, you know, that you can kind of share, you know, your experiences, and it's for the good of the movie, you know. So we're a pretty open bunch of filmmakers.
Mm-hmm. And what's so extraordinary about it is it deals with these heavy themes. I mean, the movie, if people haven't seen it, it sounds a lot more depressing talking about it. This is a kid's movie, but it's nonetheless very lively and exuberant and colorful and imaginative. Talk a bit about creating the world of Zootopia.
Well, we knew from the beginning, because we had such a complex subject and because we had to make sure that the world was believable, that we couldn't just phone it in. And we did about a year of solid research into all aspects of what it was going to take to put this together, into animal behavior, into social behavior. We went to New York City to study how different neighborhoods kind of butt up against each other. We looked at how Little Italy and Chinatown border each other and how people interact just in social areas. So we tried to kind of absorb as much as we could about the world, so what we put up on the screen would be believable. We pushed new technology into the film. There was new fur technology, new lighting technology, because we wanted the film to feel real. Like years ago, Clark and I worked on a film called Bolt, which is about a little dog that went to New York City, and at the time, we did not have the technology to represent New York City the way New York City really should look, and with the crowds that you would expect in New York City, we couldn't do it. So this time, we knew we really wanted to commit and make this world feel believable. And so, but
even like the fur, like on the dog.
Oh yeah,
it was. I remember you guys talking about, and this was only what, 7 years ago.
Yeah,
that Bolt was made. That there's a pretty important scene, like a seminal scene, I would say, in the movie, where Bolt has his head out of a moving car window and feeling the rush of the wind on his face, and that fur has to be like flying in the wind, you know, and that scene almost didn't make it into the movie because we didn't have the technology to do that, you know, to move the fur. So
we almost had to shave the dog.
Like Chihuahua, you know, a short hair.
Yeah, it's like save the cat, shave the dog.
That's right, shave the dog. You know, and what a really, you know, like complex cheat had to be written.
Yeah, it's basically just distortion,
right?
As opposed to the fur actually moving. Yeah. But when we did all the research on the animals, we looked at the footage that we had taken of these animals, and you always see that there's fur moving, because in the real world, there's always some level of air movement. So then it was about creating technology that would allow us to have the hair move constantly in this movie. And while your eye isn't being drawn to it on purpose, we don't want that. It is a subtle thing that makes the characters then feel alive. So I think for us, creating the world to be as believable as possible was going to be very important, given the story we wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, going off of that, Rich, you know, you got your start in traditional hand-drawn animation, directing episodes of The Simpsons. So maybe you can talk a bit about how this new technology has changed the way you work.
Well, it certainly it's a much bigger machine, you know, than The Simpsons ever was. You know, The Simpsons, like you say, it was very traditional. We were animating on paper, you know, like Disney in the 90s, and it was working with the animators on the other side of the globe, you know, so. We had a very elaborate system of X-sheet notes, you know, to get across our direction to someone you're not even meeting face to face. So the technology could not be any different from how The Simpsons was made. However, it's like the goal of the job, though, is exactly the same. you know, to tell a story with relatable characters in a world that feels like ours, but is fantastic, you know, and that I think carries over from any medium of animation. If you're up at Leica doing stop motion or CG, you know, at Pixar, Disney animation, or 2D, like The Simpsons is still done in 2D. That's always like the goal of the director, is to connect with the audience. And sometimes you're working with a machine that's huge, you know, and sometimes you're working with one that's more intimate. So that's, to me, that's the important part. You know, you can always kind of learn the language of the technology, you know, and work with the people, the real experts behind it. But really, it's a tool to build a story that's connecting with the audience, you know, in a very human way.
Mm-hmm. And going off of that, Byron, you got your start at Disney during their big rebirth period. You worked on Pocahontas, I think, and Mulan, kind of working your way up. How did that guide you in becoming a director later on?
Well, it's funny because I didn't start off wanting to be a director at all. I kind of
You
fell into it.
Yeah.
Kept saying,
No.
I don't want to do this.
It's funny because back in the day, it's like I think they had trouble finding people who wanted to direct these films. It was more glamorous, to be honest, in the 90s to be an animator than it was ever to be a director, because the animators were much more in the forefront, and because they were sort of the stars of these films. And so all of this sort of glitz was sort of centered around these character animators, and so I was trying to learn that as I was going. But as my career progressed, I love drawing. I love to draw, and I was trained in CG, but I personally didn't have as much of a connection with it as I did with the drawing. So I was looking for a way to keep drawing, and so I eventually went into storyboarding at the advice of Chris Sanders and Dean Debois, who I'd worked with on Lilo and Stitch with Clark. And that kind of led one thing to another into this directing gig, which what I love about it, after all is said and done, I love it because and myself and Rich and other directors like us, we get to kind of go hand in hand into the fire and then on to the brink with these amazing artists, like the best artists in the world, who will give 150% for every project that they participate in. And what I loved about this particular project is that we pitched this to them very early, so they knew it was a movie about something very difficult and challenging, but they trusted us. And the fact that they will do their best no matter what to give you an extraordinary world, to give you really appealing characters, no matter what you're asking of them. We work in a pretty remarkable place, and I love that the place that we work has this history going back almost 100 years, and you know, I can trace sort of people who trained me back to people who worked at the studio back in the 30s, and I think that legacy that we all are caretakers of now is very, very important to us, and I think that's one of the reasons we get such a charge out of being here every day together.
We really are in the middle of what it seems to be another rebirth of quality Disney animation, you know, the way that it was starting with The Little Mermaid, and now your film seems to be a part of another, shall we say, second golden age of that. You know, what kind of a kick do you get out of the creativity from animation, if that makes sense? That sounded better in my mind when I came up with it.
Well, I mean, to hear you say that, you know, it's chilling, you know, to be working at the studio that inspired myself as a boy to want to work in animation, and I know just about everyone at the studio kind of has had their experience with animation as a young person that drove them, you know, to this place. And like my whole life, I've always gotten a kick out of the creative process, you know, from like drawing, you know, in school. We would put on puppet shows with my friends around the house, and there was always like a satisfaction and that came from doing that kind of thing, you know. or even just like I was someone that could just sit around talking with my friends about something and dreaming things, and that gave me that kick that you're talking about. So the kick is on a level that's being here that it's almost undescribable, you know, to be working at the place that inspired me as a kid, you know, on very, very fresh material that's born from the directors. It's not an executive run studio. It's an artist run studio. It's unlike any job I've ever had before. You know, I used to think that the Simpsons was the pinnacle, you know, of creativity, and then after that, Futurama. But this is unlike anything I've ever been involved with. To be working with these guys and just hundreds of amazing artists that that the world doesn't always get to see, but we get to be here and to represent and to speak for them and to put their work up on screen. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's gratitude, I guess, is what I have, and just humility, you know, for this position.
And just to see it, you know, I think as we've all three of us have been here for a while, we've seen Disney go through good times and some pretty bad times. So, and Disney, for like such an old established studio, has been the underdog in a lot of ways in the, you know, past decade or so, and to see it really flourish now with such great, you know, smart filmmakers, you know, Jen Lee, Chris Buck with Frozen, and all just getting more and more smart, talented people in here and telling stories that are different and challenging, and I think it's great for us, it's great for the audience, and it makes us appreciate, I think, what our jobs are even more when we have to deal with something that's challenging. So it's a remarkable time for us, and the health of the studio has never been better, so we're remarkably fortunate to be here when we are.
Mm-hmm. And for your work, you've both been nominated for Oscars individually. You for Bolt, you for Wreck-It Ralph. Rich, you also have won a couple of Emmys for The Simpsons and Futurama. So lastly, since we're an awards website, I just want to ask what that kind of recognition has meant to you throughout your careers.
I mean, it's such a good feeling, you know, it's unlike anything to go, you know, just even to be nominated, to be at that ceremony with so many creative people, with people that I just have respected throughout my career, you know, and you know, to feel that camaraderie, you know, the Oscars is the Oscars for Wreck-It Ralph, to be there with my children and just to be there with Brenda Chapman and Mark Andrews and the teams from Leica and from the group from the Pirate movie, you know, Aardman, you know, just my God, that was like my favorite part of the ceremonies. You know, it's those weeks, you know, leading up to it, where you get to know people that you know, maybe you wouldn't cross paths with, you know, in your career because of proximity or the medium that they work in. Like, and those connections that you make to those people are, you know, that more than anything, like, and just the memories of those, even like those early Emmy, you know, ceremonies on The Simpsons, to be there as a group, you know, on this show that no one expected to last a season, you know, that it's been on for 26 years, you know, and just those early days, I have fond memories of those times of being together as a group.
Yeah, and I think for me, like growing up and watching the Oscars and the Golden Globes for years, that was a way that I connected my love of film with these other people out there who obviously love film. And I would wait for these Academy montages of great films, and there was something about that just got me worked up, and I love that. And that's the fact that you're in the room with people who love that medium and appreciate what it can do. It's pretty remarkable.
I wish the audience, because I think the audience, all they know is, you know, the ceremony, be it the Oscars, Golden Globes, or you know, Emmys, but especially with the Oscars, those weeks leading up, like I said, and just the different moments that you have meeting all these new people or people that you've known forever. to me, that's what it's really about, you know. And I wish there was some way that the audience could experience that feeling rather than just kind of the ceremony at the culmination of the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's because, I mean, that's what I carry with me. You know, it's really special. I guess.
Oh, well, I mean, I was a kid. My grandparents owned a movie theater when I was a kid.
How about that?
Oh wow! Oh, wow.
We went to movies all the time.
Maybe you heard of them, the AMC family.
Clark's last name is AMC.
AMC.
Clark David Spencer. He gets all the free popcorn.
So movies were always a part of my life, and as a result, so were the Oscars. And it was an amazing thing to have the family when that moment came, and in the day it was in March, sitting down, watching it all was incredible. But then to actually have that opportunity to have been nominated, and then to be at that ceremony, it was beyond anything I could have ever dreamed or hoped of. I mean, you get into it because you love the creative process, and you make movies because you enjoy working with these incredible artists, but then to have it go to that level is something you can only dream of, and to have it come true is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much, and congratulations on the film. It's wonderful, and hopefully I'll see you at this year's Oscars.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
All right, take care. Thank you.